and welcome to this episode of Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick, and today we're going to talk about planning and development and really your input on where the city of Hampton is going and what we'd like to be like for the next 5 years or even beyond that time frame. My guest today is Terry O'Neill, who's the Community Development Director in Hampton.
Good morning.
Now, Terry, you've been with the city a little while. You've got a long, not like, you're ancient, but a longer perspective than some of us about planning and development in Hampton. How long have you been with the city?
I'm getting ready to finish my 29th year. So yeah, I've been here a while.
So you've been through these planning and strategic planning and other kinds of processes, once or twice.
Yeah, actually started out with the city of Hampton back when there was just a planning department. So yeah, I've been through the early 80s planning processes, the ones we did around 1989, 1990. And then subsequent ones through the 90s, the 2006 community planning effort, which was the one that preceded this one, and now we're in the midst of the most recent update process that we're going through right now.
Now, as an outsider, before I worked for the city, I never quite understood the planning process. What is a community plan? What is a strategic plan? What are the master plans? I mean, we do a lot of planning here.
Yeah, and I do know that can be a little daunting for people to kind of sort through. First, I think the most important thing is to understand that the Commonwealth of Virginia requires every locality to develop what they call comprehensive plans or community plans. So it is a legal mandate that we go through this process, and they do require us to review it with our community partners every 5 years. And so it does begin to be kind of this ongoing dialogue and process. In Hampton, we have a pretty long tradition of doing multiple levels of planning documents. The community plan or the comprehensive plan is the most broad document, and it deals with kind of the really big issues in our community. The strategic plan really asks the community to help us identify kind of the handful of issues that they think are the most important for the local government and the community partners that would stand beside local government, to identify those as the most important things. And then the last one you mentioned, the master plans, or they're sometimes called neighborhood plans, are the level of planning documents where we really try to zero in more into a very finite physical area, so a neighborhood, a commercial district, or something like that, and get more specific about actually what we're doing in those areas. So those are kind of how they all fit together.
So they do really, they do fit together, and the community plan maybe is one of the foundations because other things begin to build from that.
That's correct. The requirement from the Commonwealth is that we look at the community as a whole, and we try to produce a document which can serve as a very broad guide or a very broad roadmap to how the community is going to develop. So, where do roads go? Where do new neighborhoods go? Where do shopping districts go? Where do transportation facilities, whether they be roads or mass transit or those kind of things? Where do we locate parks? So all of those kinds of things are part of that broad overall document. And then based on these other conversations that we have with our community partners, we zero in on the things that are most important and maybe need to be looked at a greater level of detail.
Okay. So for this community plan, there were some subgroups. First of all, you decided what the issues were and then created subgroups around those issues. How did that come about? I mean, there were a lot of people who volunteered, either gave input once or really stayed in weekly meetings to hammer this out.
Right, and I think it was one of your very first sort of public engagement processes with the city when you came on board. We kicked off that process back in the fall of 2010 and had, or was it, I think 2010, and we had about 250 people come to the convention center and begin the dialogue about what those issues were. They gave us sheets and sheets of issues, and through a series of discussions, we zeroed those down to 10 key issue areas that the community helped us to identify. And as you mentioned, the way we have traditionally in the last 10 or 15 years gone through this process is to ask community focus groups to participate in each of those topic areas. So we had 10 groups of community representatives and leaders who would sit down with us on a regular basis and discuss those issues.
And some of these are just your average citizens who stood up and got involved. And sometimes it is, as you said, a partner agency, or the schools are part of the city of Hampton, but we have separate management structures, and obviously they're very involved in the education piece. What are some of the other topic issues, and what did citizens say were really important under those?
Well, the one I think that's the newest and probably got the most airtime was Waterways.
Right.
That had never been identified by our community as kind of a strategic issue. One of those 5 or 10 issues that they think are most important for us to pay attention to. So that was brand new. The environment, although it had been something that was included in our community plan in the past, the community members felt like that where we were as a community, being a Chesapeake Bay community, that it needed to have its own section within this document. So that was identified. Diversity and a diverse population was a carryover from before. Regionalism and economics, kind of the economy of our community was important. Public safety is always a big one that generally shows up every time we do this. Issues around housing and neighborhoods. We are a community of neighborhoods, so people believe, very sincerely that that's an issue that we have to pay some attention to. So, and I'm leaving out a few because I haven't named all 10, but I mean that's kind of a flavor of what the topics are that the community said we need to focus on.
And there was a lot of crossover in those, I noticed. I mean, I remember that in the health group and the neighborhoods group, and maybe even in a third place, people talked about having more bikeways and pedestrian paths and getting people able to be out walking and moving from one place to another, being a little bit less of a car society.
Yeah, when you get into it, you do see that the groups, while they are focusing on or zeroing in on a particular topic, they do sort of bring in other issues. And so when you step back and look at the work that the community did in each of these groups, you start to identify what we call some common themes that run through all 10 of the issues, or at least a majority of them. And mobility, diversity and ways of getting around, community health, you mentioned, was one that has become an issue that is really new to us, at least in terms of identifying it as important, which relates to the mobility issue. People want to be able to get out and walk around. They want to be able to ride a bicycle. They want to be able to go to a park and have those kind of activities. So a lot of those common themes, lifelong education, for example, is one, and it crosses over into all kinds of things. It's not just traditional education. It's the idea that people my age who are getting up there in age, they change careers and they need to be retrained. It's continuous education. It also talks about preparing young people who are preschool age to be ready to come into our school system, ready to learn. And so that is kind of one that crosses many of the topic areas.
Well, I know even within the city, we looked at that quest for lifelong learning and tried to reframe and repackage what we do in terms of education and citizen opportunities into one place so people could find them a little easier. If you want to go to the Citizens Fire Academy, or if you want to go to parenting or mom and baby classes or master gardener classes, where you could find all that in one place, because I think people do want that if they can make the time and if it's not too hard for them to find.
Yeah, a couple things we've heard. Hampton has a pretty long history of trying to provide these kind of sort of educational opportunities for our citizens to learn about local government and the services we provide. And when we first started doing that, most of them were sort of standalone offerings that the citizens could sign up for. We've really, as you said, we've really tried to evolve that almost into kind of a community college model where we will have these offerings and citizens will be able to avail themselves when it's convenient for them. I mean, most of them tell us we're all very busy, busier than ever today, and it's important for them to have access to these on their schedule when it's convenient to them, not when it's convenient to us. And so the old model of saying we're going to do it on the third Monday of every month at 7 o'clock doesn't really, doesn't really match what people are looking for. So that move, I think, is going to continue as we go forward.
So what do we do now? We have a document, Council has adopted it, and we're going to put on the screen the web address so that people can go and read through it at their leisure, because it is fairly dense. What happens next?
Well, I think the first thing to realize is the piece that Council has endorsed back in November is just the first piece of it. It really is the identification of the community's vision and goals.
Okay.
And so those can sometimes be really broad, hard things to get your arms around. But it's important, and the corollary that I share with a lot of community groups is it's kind of akin to you as a family deciding you're going to go on a vacation. One of the very first things you do is decide where you're going. That's your destination. Well, the vision and goals is kind of trying to establish where our destination is. And now the next steps are we take that direction and we ask all the departments in the city government, as well as our community partners, the school system, Centera Health System, Riverside, the not-for-profits, the business community, to try to look at those goals and try to identify what they can do to contribute to reaching ultimately the outcomes that are identified. And so internally, each department will be asked to develop their own work plans, action plans, if you want to call it, that support as many of those 10 focus areas as is relevant to their responsibilities.
And I know the budget is going to be a challenge because some of those areas really talk about quality of life, and the extras are the things that have taken the biggest hit in budget cutbacks over the years. That the mainstays of government, I mean police, fire, safety, roads, have been fairly constant, but where it's been hard to fund have been some of those quality of life programs.
Yeah, and I know, because I go to many community meetings, I know there can be a frustration out there about how long it takes. They see a recommendation in a city document and they say, gee, it's been 2 years and I haven't seen anything. Building a city and doing some of the things that are described in these broad vision and goals sometimes can happen quickly. But like you said, in an environment where funding is very difficult these days, it often is going to be a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year journey to get some of these things accomplished. And so, everybody wants things to happen now,
right?
And that's
understandable. And they don't want to pay for it. They want it now with no money.
And that's understandable. That's the society we live in. But building a community takes a long time. We're 400 years old, and so doing some of the things that people see, the evolution of Peninsula Town Center, the convention center, some of our recreation centers, all were ideas that one time were in one of these planning documents, but we don't really, unless you're in a position like me, nobody would have a reason to sort of connect that happened 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and now that facility or that service that we as a community asked for actually exists. The connection is hard to make when it's 5 or 10 or 15 years between the idea and when it actually shows up.
That is part of your job, and I'm sure other people at the city too, to take things that residents say they want and put those building blocks in, even if it is over an extended period of time.
Yeah, our department's responsibility, I like to describe it to them as, we're in the idea business, and sometimes that's, difficult to sort of explain. We do some implementation. We're responsible for doing things like making sure our zoning regulations match up with our goals and objectives in our plan, and many other things. But we do spend a lot of time trying to fulfill the responsibility of looking to the future. What's around the corner that isn't obvious for the city to see? What are the challenges or the threats that are out there, so that we can hopefully be prepared when those things happen. And and that's not the easiest thing in the world to convey to people, to get people even interested in those things. We're so much in the here and now. But I think it's important. Somebody has to be doing that, and we, along with many other entities in local government and in the community, have to somebody's got to be looking out there a little farther than tomorrow or next week, and that's largely our job to do that.
That's great. And so what I'm going to ask of you is if you can come back periodically and maybe give us some updates on what is happening that's coming out of the community plan, because so many people really did invest time, and I know that we've listened to them.